Hey everyone, welcome to our Powerful Devs Hack Together live streams. The Powerful Devs Hack Together is a 2-week hackathon for developers with the theme of building secure, scalable, and AI-powered enterprise solutions with the Power Platform. We have 8 categories and 4 live streams teaching you how to be a powerful developer. We'll have 8 cash prizes in these different categories like AI-powered solutions, Power Apps solutions, best in automation, and so many more. And you can win up to $550 in US cash prizes for the best projects in each of these different categories. We're super excited to have you join us for this hackathon. And now I'm going to turn it over to our friends at Microsoft Reactor.
Thank you, April, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Powerful Devs Hack. My name's Anna. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions. Our session is being recorded. It'll be available to view on demand within 24 hours. With that, I'll turn it over to our speaker for today. Thanks for joining.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rabia Williams, and I'm a cloud developer advocate. And with me is my colleague, Paolo. Hi, Paolo.
Hi, Rabia, and hello, everyone. I'm Paolo Pialorsi, and I'm a developer advocate as well.
Awesome. So let's get started. Today, we are going to learn about securing Microsoft Copilot Studio integration with external connectors. We're going to talk about Power Platform connectors, the basics of it. We'll show you many demos, and we will show you how to secure them, different authentication options available. We will take you through connecting with Graph API, which is the Microsoft 365 data available to you, and custom APIs as well. So let's get started with the basics. I'm going to take you through understanding Power Platform connectors. All right. So Power Platform connectors enable us to connect with external services and systems, creating a seamless flow of information and functionality. I would like to call them as these essential bridges that enable us to integrate, automate, and innovate across various services and systems, making our digital landscape more accessible and productive. Now, these connectors are incredibly powerful when it comes to reading and managing data across various platforms. They will allow us to pull in data from multiple sources. Like in today's session, me and Paolo will be showing you getting data from Excel sheet, getting data from our custom API, etc. So you can get it from multiple sources, manipulate it as needed, then push it back as well, all within the same Power Platform ecosystem. And they rely on REST APIs. So they are naturally robust, scalable, capable of interacting with a wide array of services that support RESTful communication. And one of the standout features of Power Platform connectors, and which is truly one of the things that I love, is its versatility. That once you build it, they can be utilized in Power Automate to automate all your workflows and processes, in Power Apps to build custom applications with these, Logic Apps to design a bit more complex integration, and finally in Copilot Studio. So if you've got all that, just one connector you can use in multiple areas, and especially in Copilot Studio, because we're going to show you agents built with these connectors. With that understanding, let me show you a demo of a connector. Now, I'm going to give you a context of what this connector does. It's called the Agentic HR, and it's an agent for Microsoft 365 Copilot. Now, imagine a company like Microsoft having candidates for a particular role. You can imagine hundreds of thousands of people would have applied for one particular role, and even more if there is multiple roles available. Now, imagine you have got that in an Excel sheet, and you're a HR person trying to understand, filter, analyze who's the right one for the role, based on their skills, based on the languages they know, the programming, etc. Now, the demo here is having an agent that helps the user analyze and filter through this list of candidates, but using a connector, an Excel online business connector within the agent. So let me show you how it's done. All right, so I'm in Copilot Studio. I'm going to open up my agent. It's a Microsoft 365 agent. And in here, you will see, it's loading, Agentic HR. So this is my agent. I'm going to run you quickly through the description, instruction, etc., and how I have configured it. So as you can see, I've given a very simple instruction on analyzing and helping employees gather information about candidates. The knowledge base is not there yet. I have action. So this is where I connect my connector with the Excel Online Business Connector, which is connected to an Excel sheet in SharePoint. Now, let me open this up and show you the configuration. It is added as an action within the agent. Now, this is the name, action name, display name, and description. In the input section is what we're interested in. We've set the value of the SharePoint site, the document library, the Excel sheet, and the table that it has to refer. From this, the agent is able to go ahead and get the information. Now, this list at the moment, this Excel sheet, let me just pull that up, has just 5 candidates at the moment. But you can imagine in a real world scenario, this will be huge. So let's go back and try to run this agent and see what we get. So I'm in Copilot app in Teams. I'm going to pull this agent in here and start with this prompt, which is please list all the candidates. Now it will go ahead, and this is super simple, right? You've seen in that agent that we have instruction, we just have this one connector. And with that, it's able to connect with the Excel sheet and bring back information. Now, I might ask for other things like list candidates for HR role, like HR director or manager. Then it knows that it goes ahead and filters out, analyzes and filters out based on what roles this person have had previously. So you'll see that we have 2 candidates brought back. Now, I could even ask something like, find me someone to write policies. Okay, so this is specifically mentioned in the job description. So it will go ahead and further drill through the skills and say that, okay, currently Bob looks like someone, Bob Brown looks like someone who's got that skill. So this is the demo for an introduction to Power Platform Connector, where an agent in Copilot Studio that we've built is using a connector to the Excel sheet and bringing the data in. You could also manipulate this back, and Paolo's got some amazing demos showing you where you could do post operations as well. So I will leave that with you, Paolo, to show folks how you can create a Power Platform connector like this one.
Yeah, thank you, Rabia. And yes, let's switch then to my screen and let's keep on talking about the potential of this technology. First of all, what you have seen so far is a demo about how to use a connector which is provided out of the box by the Power Platform. But actually, today we want to cover also how you can create your own connectors and how you can secure the connection to those connectors. So whenever you want to create a custom connector in the Power Platform, you can, first of all, create a REST API or rely on an already existing REST API, which can be built with .NET Framework, Azure Function, Node.js, whatever technology you like. It doesn't need to be a Microsoft technology only. It can be any kind of REST API that you have. Then, once you have the API, In order to create the connector, you can use different techniques. One is to start from blank, as I will show you shortly, and you can simply define step by step the structure of the REST API and how you can invoke the REST API. I put some stars on this slide just to give you an idea of what is my preference. So this one is something that an option that works, but of course it is quite tough to create all of the definition manually. You can start from an Azure service, which is a functionality under preview right now. So if you are hosting your solution as an Azure function, for example, in an Azure service, you can automatically create the connection starting from the definition of the function itself. Or you can use an OpenAPI specification file or a Postman collection if you use Postman as a tool for testing and writing documentation for your REST APIs. And both of these options are in the list of my favorite ones, because using this technique, you can actually have proper documentation of your APIs, and you can easily import that documentation into the custom connector and make it become the connector that you are going to use in the Power Platform. One last option that you have is to rely on a GitHub repository that you can see here on this slide, which is full of samples of Power Platform connectors built by third parties. And you can learn how to build your own connector, or you can reuse some of those connectors. And I gave it just 3 stars because it is something that you can reuse. But of course, if you are willing to create a connector for your own API, you will have to go for the OpenAPI specification or for the Postman collection. Another one and last option that you have is to rely on Azure API management. And if you will do that, again, it will be easy to export and import into the Power Platform a connector for the API. So these are plenty of options for you to create your custom connectors. But now let's see how you can do that in practice. So let me switch to my demo environment. And here we have the user interface of Power Automate. If you want to work with custom connectors, you can simply go under More, Discover All. And here in this section, you will find the custom connectors right here. I already pinned the custom connector in the UI of my Power Automate web client, just because I keep on using them on a daily basis. And that's why here I have my list of predefined custom connector in my environment in Power Platform. Now, if you want to create a new one, you can start, as I was telling you, from scratch, creating a connector from blank. If you will do that, you will need to provide a demo. So it could be Powerful Dev demo or whatever else. And once you do that, you can define general information like the icon, the color, the description, the base host URL of the API that you want to consume, the base URL of the API, the security section, and we will dig into it later, the definition of all of the operations that you want to expose through the custom connector. So let's say that you have an operation to consume a list of candidates, just to make an example. Well, you can do that, and you can give a unique ID to that operation. You can import the operation defining if it will be a get, a post, or a put, or whatever else HTTP verb. And depending on what you choose, you will also have the capability to provide, for example, the structure of the body for the request and additional headers that you want to provide. Of course, all of this can be done completely manually, as I was telling you, starting from blank. But of course, this is not necessarily the best option. So let me go back and let me show you what you can do if you have an OpenAPI specification. So let's choose the import an OpenAPI file. And this time, I'm going to use an API, a REST API that we created and that we will dig into later on in this session. This REST API is a REST API to handle a list of candidates, again, as before. But now it is not an Excel spreadsheet. It is actually, right now, for the sake of making an example, a JSON file that we make available through a REST API. So here we have a list of candidates. And again, we can make an HTTP request. Now I'm running it locally. And using this HTTP file, I can test it, and we can see that we can get a list of candidates. We can get a single candidate. We can even add a candidate, providing in the body of a post request the actual content of the candidate that we want to add. And as you can see right here at the bottom of this file, now we have the new candidate added to the list of our candidates. So let's say we want to use this API. We provide a name, which could be HR Services Demo. And we provide the OpenAPI spec file, which is a JSON file that I have on my file system. By doing that, the Power Platform UI will process the content of the specific file. And again, I can provide the general information like the host name and the base URL. But what is interesting is that in the definition section, I already have all of my operations defined. So for example, I have the get all candidates, as well as I have the add candidate, which I used before. And we can clearly see that to add a new candidate, we can make a post request, providing in the body all of the information that we were supposed to provide to our endpoint to create a new candidate. So this is a very convenient option if you want to easily create a custom connector. Now, the focus of this session is to secure the consumption of those custom connectors. So I will stop here this demo, and I'll go back to the actual content to show you how you can properly secure this content. So back to you, Rabia.
All right. So the session is all about securing, like Paolo mentioned. So we will run through the options you have, how to connect, authenticate a connector. So these are the options available. And as usual, Paolo has gone in and put stars in all the authentication options. So no authentication gets a thumbs down, and then you can see other stars. I'm really curious to know, Paolo, why you gave OpenAuth a 3-star, but we'll come back to that later.
Okay.
All right, so I'll start with no authentication. So this is easy. This method does not require any form of authentication. As you probably know, many public APIs, such as Weather API, provide general information without requiring authentication. Easy to implement, but no security. So anyone can access your service. So that's why Paolo has given a thumbs down. Basic authentication, user provides the username and password to authenticate. It is simple to implement, but the credentials are everywhere. So it's sent with every request, making it vulnerable to interception if not used over a secure line. Also, you would also want to think of some investments in terms of securing your storage, your securing these credentials in a storage. So that's another overhead. API keys, users provide an API key to authenticate. A classic example would be OpenWeatherMap, suitable for services where user identity is not required, but using a key you can access in a controlled fashion. Easy to implement again, so you basically pass them in header or as a query parameter. But the downside would be, again, this API keys can be easily shared or leaked, and also it doesn't provide user-specific access control. Now, the final and the best option, although it's only 3 stars for Paolo, is a robust and flexible authentication framework using OpenAuth. So it allows authorization based on the user identity. So your service knows that it's you logging in, so the things that you have permission will be given access to. A classic example would be Google APIs using OAuth 2.0 to allow third-party applications to access data securely. It provides a very strong security and user-specific access control, like I mentioned, like 100 times right now. So the only downside would be more complex to implement compared to other methods. But that is why we have session like this, so we can show you how to do that without going through a lot of problems. So let me quickly show you this OAuth 2.0 options. You could connect to any external system listed in this particular list. I'm more interested in the Azure Active Directory one today, because most commonly in the Microsoft ecosystem, you would connect it using Azure Active Directory, which is now called Microsoft Entra ID. Or you could go for a generic OAuth as well to implement your own. So let me quickly show you the options in a connector that I just show you, the drop down, but I could show you a bit more. Let me open up my environment. Let's just test connector and go through this wizard. You probably already saw most of it where Paolo just showed you. Let's just say API contoso.com and go to the security section, which is where we have all these options. So like I mentioned, no auth. There's nothing to set up. You can just go ahead and add your other stuff like your service API. Then basic authentication, the same thing, username and password, API key, again, whether it's header or query, and then you can pass your key with your parameter name, etc. And OAuth 2.0. Now, this is where it gets a bit interesting. Like I said, it is a bit more complex compared to the other authentication options. Now, what you would need is you can choose an identity provider. In most of the case, when you're dealing with the Microsoft 365 Microsoft ecosystem, you could go for Azure Active Directory. You'd need to create an app registered in Azure portal, and then pass its client ID, its secret. You'll have to create a secret and pass in the authorization URL, which is already given to you, your tenant ID, and resource URL, which is what resource or what API you're accessing, and the scope. What is the scope you have defined in your application that you've registered in Azure Active Directory. So these are the options. We will go in detail in the coming demos, but just to make you familiarize with what we're talking about, we're just showing you this demo. And now I'm going to give it back to Paolo for the topic, consuming Microsoft Graph in a custom connector. What is the step needed that we just talked about now? Over to you, Paolo.
Thank you, Rabia. And just for the sake of clarity, I gave 3 stars to open authorization just because I wanted to use a score based on a scale of from 0 to 3. So it was the best one still. Okay, so don't worry.
That's good. No, I'm relieved.
Okay, so now you have seen with Rabia that you can configure a connector to use open authorization to secure communication with an external API. And so we said, what if the external API you want to consume is, for example, Microsoft Graph? So let's start from the basics, and let's start consuming Microsoft Graph with a Power Platform connector. If you want to do that, as Rabia was explaining you will need, first of all, to register a consumer application in Entra ID or Azure Active Directory if you want to use the previous name. When you do that, you need to grant to that application all of the permissions that you need to consume the target API that you are willing to consume. So, for example, if you want to send an email, you will need the send mail permission. If you want to create a team in a Microsoft Teams, you will need the Teams create permission, and so on and so forth. Then you will also need to copy and reuse the client ID, the client secret that you will need to create for that application, and eventually the unique URI of the target API that you want to consume in order to reuse those information in the configuration of your connector security. And as you will see shortly, you will also need to provide in the authentication configuration of your app in Entra ID a redirect URL for a web application authentication, and that redirect URL will be given to you by the Power Platform. So basically, in the Power Platform, when registering the connector, you will get back a redirect URL that you will be able to reuse to configure the authentication of your application. Looks like a complex set of tasks, but it is actually quite easy, as Rabia is going to show you in the following demo, how to consume a Microsoft Graph endpoint with a connector in Power Platform. So back to you, Rabia.
All right, thanks so much, Paolo. So I'm in Azure portal at the moment. I'm just going to show you quickly how to register a new app in Azure Active Directory, or now called Microsoft Entra ID. So you basically go ahead and register an application, give it a name, what tenant, etc., and register. So I've already done one. There are a few steps, so I've done to save time. All right, so I'm just going to pull that up. So this is a demo that I'm going to show you where you have an agent that will help you create teams on the fly while using natural language prompt, and it's connected to Microsoft Graph to be able to do that. So I've already registered this application in Azure Active Directory. I've done the exact same step in the beginning, just name using single tenant, and I've just given a redirect URL, which is the global.azure team.consent.azure, this a link that I've shown you. Now we'll come back to this one because Paolo already explained to you, but maybe we'll take it one step at a time. So this is the web, this is a static like constant that you have to give when you are registering an application. Once you've done that, you come back to copy the application ID. So this is the client ID that you'll need to go ahead and configure back in your connector, which I will show you. And then you would come into your certificates and secret and create a new secret and copy that value as well. So now you've got the client ID, you have got the client secret of your application registration, you have set the redirect URL to that constant static value, and then now we need to configure the permission for Graph. So you come to API permission, you would add permission, say delegated, Microsoft Graph delegated for now, because now you're going to access this agent or this connector using your own identity. So you'll use delegated permission, and then you choose team.create, the scope that's needed to be able to allow your connector to create a team on behalf of you. So I should not be using that word, but team.create. So this is the scope that we need, and then that's all that's needed in this side of things. Then we come back to the connector. So let me open up connector from the Power Automate environment. And as you can see, I've already created this connector. So let's go ahead and find out what I've put in there. So the generic information here, we know that we're calling Graph. So the API host is graph.microsoft.com. And the other stuff, I would leave it for you to go ahead and figure out, like the icon color and description, etc. And then let's go to security. I'm just going to go ahead and edit to show this better. So I've chosen OAuth 2.0 from the option. I've chosen Azure Active Directory because I'm using the app register there. As I've told you before, we've got the client ID and the client secret that I've already put in. I've got the authorization URL, and I know that the resource and tenant ID, then the resource URL is Graph. So I've put that in as well, https graph.microsoft.com. I also know there's a scope team.create. That is what we are using for this connector. Once all that is filled in, once I save the connector, there will be a redirect URL automatically created for you. And it's kind of grayed out because you can't go ahead and edit it. You copy that and you come back to your Azure portal, and you go to your redirect URL and you have to paste that in. That's exactly what I've done. So this is the second redirect URL that you need to make sure that entire authentication connection happens, or that redirection happens for authenticating when you're connecting with your connector. So this is all the step that you need, that Paolo just mentioned in dot points in the previous slide, that you need to do to go ahead and make that authentication happen, authorization as well. So now that we know, let's go back to the connector, and in the we're done that. This is the definition section. If you remember, Paolo showed us doing it manually and as well as using an OpenAI API spec document. In the action section of, if it's Graph, you can go ahead and say, okay, this is for creating team. I've put the general information in, and I can import the sample. This is also something Paolo showed you, where you could mention it's a post operation, the URL and headers. And now what I like about this one is you can go to, when it's Graph, you can go to the documentation for Microsoft Graph API, come really down, and in here you have everything that you need to import that sample. So you know it's a post operation, you know this is the API URL, and this is the body that you need to add for it to get a positive response. So you can come back to the connector, and you can just paste that in. So if I select post, it knows that it needs a body, so you can just paste that in, paste the URL. If you need a header, you can put that in as well, and then import. I've done exactly that, and I'm able to import that in here, so you can see all that information in here. All right, so this is what we've done, and then finally you could go ahead and test it. But let's use the agent, because the session is about Copilot. We want to show you the agent that we've built using this Teams Create Rabia, apparently, just so that Paolo doesn't go ahead and add more stuff into it. I've just put that name in. Right, so no, he doesn't do that, but let's go back to the agent and test this. I've got this Teams creation agent created by Copilot Studio. And let's just open up and show you all the information. It's taken a minute. Okay, so your agent is ready. Now this agent has some instructions saying that's an assistant to create teams, and there's an action Teams Create, which is exactly the connector that we saw earlier. It's an action, and it will go ahead and call the Teams Create Rabia one. So that's what it is. Input and output, you probably already know the value, the display name, and I didn't put the description. I won't put the description. Let's see if AI can do some magic there. So let's go back and test this agent. Let's go to the chat. So this is my Teams creation agent. I've done heaps of testing before this demo now today. So let's go ahead and ask my agent. Oh, I actually didn't show you one of the most important things is to test your agent. You could also test this in here, which probably Paolo will show you. But you could also go to activity. You'll need to turn on the, sorry, not activity, the channel. You need to turn on the Microsoft Teams channel for it to start appearing in Teams. So that's an important aspect. You can open your agent from here as well. So you can directly access your agent. I already have published it and done all that. So I have my agent here. So hi, create a team for Power Dev stuff. And it will go ahead. I've not given the description. So, you know, as an agent, I want it to do more powerful things. So it'll create the agent, hopefully, using Graph, and then it will also fill in some information for me. So it created the team for me. It's and also, I think it has understood that it is for coordinating all the activities related to Power Devs. Let's go back and confirm. Yes, it has created that for me, the team for me. And if I go to the settings, it has also put that description in. So this is the demo showing you how you can connect. So the first time you use this agent, it will ask you to connect through a sign-in, and that's where that connection happens, where it identifies you're the person accessing it and further do all that stuff that's needed. Now that's a demo for Microsoft Teams, and I know that there's an exciting demo coming up where Paolo will show you how to do the same thing but with your custom API. So over to you, Paolo.
Thank you, Rabia. Great demo. And yes, before moving to the fully customized REST API, we are going to touch one more little thing about how to consume, for example, Micrograph or any other API through a Power Platform connector. And in fact, what if instead of using a connection based on the current user identity, as Rabia just showed you, you want to rely on a set of client ID and client secret credentials, because, for example, you want to run the operation not under the identity of the current user, but maybe under an application identity or a service principal identity. Well, that's exactly what you can do with the Power Platform connectors. You can enable the so-called service principal connection. If you do that, the authentication against the backend API will happen through a client ID and a client secret, and indeed a tenant ID, which will be used to identify the tenant that you want to use to authenticate. And you can do that, for example, because you want to have a set of credentials which will be persistent and which will not need the users to connect every now and then when their personal tokens will expire, for example, or if you want, as I said, to do operations and actions not on behalf of the current user, but on behalf of an application identity. Well, if we think again about the API for creating a team through Microsoft Graph, that's precisely an API that you can use either using the so-called delegated permissions with the identity of the user consuming the API, which is what we have just seen with Rabia, or you can use the same API to create a team with an application permission and with an application identity. And in that scenario, we will need to provide, as like as before, the information about the team plus the information about who will be the owner of the team that will be created for us. So let's see how we can do that in practice with the following demo. So let me switch back to my list of connectors, and here I have a Teams Management SP, where the SP stands for Service Principal, in which I'm going to show you how to do that. So first of all, let me switch briefly to the documentation of the Graph endpoint that Rabia was already using before, the one to create a new team. And as you can see, this endpoint can be used providing either a delegated token with permission team.create or an application token still with permission team.create but of type application. And in fact, if I switch here on my application in Entra ID, we can see that I have an application that I registered, and in the API permissions section of this application, I granted the team.create application permission to that app. So once I've done that, we can see that in the documentation, we have an example of how we can create a new team, providing a JSON body, which will include not only the generic information about the team, but also the information about who the owner will be for the new team that we are going to create. So let's copy this JSON because we are going to use it very soon. So let me go back here and let me edit this connector. In the security settings of this connector, I configured it to, let me do the edit actually. I can configure it to use a service principal. And if I do that, I can enable for that specific client ID and client secret, providing as before, the authorization URL, the tenant ID, which can be common for multi-tenancy, the resource URI for Microsoft Graph, and the team create permission that we want to use as a permission scope in the request. But by doing that, in our scenario, we are going to make the request using a service principal identity instead of a user identity. So here I already have a connection, but if I want to create a new one, I can click on new connection. And as you can see here, I can choose to use a service principal connection. By doing that, I can provide the client ID, the secret, and the tenant that I want to use to authenticate with my client credentials to actually execute my request. And here I can provide all of the information in the body, and I'm going to use this test interface for the sake of simplicity. But since I don't want to provide all the complex JSON here in the input fields, I can simply switch to raw body, and I can simply provide the actual JSON right here of the request message that I want to send to Microsoft Graph. The display name of my team could be, for example, Powerful Dev Team. The description can be whatever you like, description of the team, because I'm a developer and I don't have any good fantasy. And then here you have to provide the owner that has to be configured for that theme. And you need to specify the owner by ID, where this ID is the unique ID of the user in my tenant. How can I get that information? Well, you can go to the Graph Explorer, aka ms/GE, and through this tool, you can make a query once you are connected, like I am right now in the target tenant, and you can get the information about the current user. And this ID is the value I'm looking for. So let me use this value, and let me trigger this, let me test this operation. takes a while, and hopefully in a matter of few seconds, we should have our team created. As you can see, it was successful. We've got a 202. And if I go back to Teams, I can see that in the Teams, I have my Powerful Dev team for which I have been configured as an owner, even if this one was created with a service principal identity instead of the current user identity. Of course, then I put myself as an owner still to show you the result, but this is to give you the idea that you can rely on service principals if you want. So now that we have had a good coverage of all of the options to consume an API, let's talk about how we can consume an API of our own. So coming back to the idea that as powerful developers, we might want to create and consume our own APIs through a connector. In order to do that, we can create an API with whatever technology we like as an Azure function, as a Snap web application, or whatever else. If we are going to host our API in Azure, for example, in an Azure function or in an Azure web application, we can eventually rely on the so-called easy authentication, so that all of the kind of complexity of configuring and exposing our API in a secure way will be well hidden by the easy authentication, which makes, as the name implies, easy to do that. And as such, you can simply rely on consuming your API. Or, and this is the scenario I want to dig into, you can completely customize your authentication and authorization logic and create the security infrastructure of your own. So at the beginning, almost at the beginning of this session, we have seen that we have that HR service that I showed you before, which allows us to get the list of candidates, a single candidate, add or remove a candidate from the list of candidates for our hypothetical HR office. Well, that API actually is provided also as a secured API, which we secured using Open Authorization and Entra ID to get authentication and authorization. So what can we do in the field of authorization? Well, when you have a fully custom layer of security in your own API, you can rely on custom permission scopes in the code base of your API, and you can authorize users' requests based on the access token that you will get when processing the requests. It will rely on Open Authorization 2.0, and the Power Platform Connector greatly supports this capability. So what do we need to do? Well, when we were consuming Microsoft Graph, we registered an application in Entra ID as a consumer for Microsoft Graph. We still need to do the same for consuming any other API of our own. But in order to expose our own API, we also need to register yet another application in Entra ID, which will be used to expose our API in a secure manner. So we will end up having two application registrations. One for the API itself, and in that registration, we are going to declare what APIs we are going to expose and what permission scopes are needed to consume those APIs. And then we need to create or to register another application, which will be the consumer application, which we will use inside the connector configuration to consume our custom API. And as before, while configuring the custom connector, we will need a client ID, a client secret, the unique URI of the API that we want to consume, and again, the redirect URL generated on the fly by the Power Platform Connector when we register the security settings. Okay, so again, looks like a lot of stuff to do, but it is not actually. So let's dig into the real demo and let's see how to do that in practice. And little by little, we will get there. So let me first of all go back to our browser, and let's have a look at the applications that I registered in Entra ID. Here I have one application to expose the API. We named it HR Service API. This is an application that we registered in Entra ID and that we configured so that under the Expose an API section, we added a scope with a specific name and a set of descriptions, which ended up being the HR.consume permission scope that we want our consumers to have. So, in other words, in order to be able to consume this HR service API, you need to provide an access token with the HR.consume permission scope in it. When consuming Exograph and creating a team, it was team.create. When consuming our HR service, it is HR.consume. Nothing more than that, okay? And here is where you configure that thing. So here we configure HR.consume as our custom scope. And this is the unique URI that you can see also right here of the API. Well, this specific format is made actually by API followed by the unique ID, the client ID of the application itself, okay? Furthermore, in the application, in the manifest, we configured the manifest JSON to support access tokens of version 2.0. With these settings, we declare that we want to get from our consumers an open authorization access token of version 2, which means that there will be some specific information and outline settings in the access token that we are going to get and validate. Okay, that's the configuration of the API. Then we have the consumer, which is wondering what? HR service consumer. As I told you, I'm a developer. Sorry about that. So HR service consumer is the consumer of the HR service API. In this one, we have a client secret because we need it to configure the connector in the Power Platform. We have the authentication for the web platform, and here again we have the unique, return URL generated by the Power Platform connector that Rabia already showed you when consuming Exograph. Plus, in the API permission section, we configured this consumer to have the HR.consume delegated permission. How can you do that? Well, usually when you add a permission, you come here and you say, okay, I want to consume Graph or SharePoint or whatever else. Well, but if you have a custom API, you simply need to switch to the APIs my organization uses, and you will look for your own API. If you see there is HR Service API, you can choose it, and you can select the delegated permission of type HR.consume. Well, it is grayed out right now because it's already there, so I can't do that again. But at the very end, I simply granted that specific permission scope to my consumer application. That's it, okay? So those are the two applications registered in Entra ID. Now, how can we use them? Well, let me switch back to my API, and now let's dig into it a little bit more. First of all, let me stop it because we are going to restart it with a different behavior. In the settings of my sample, and you will find also at the end of the session a link to dig into the source code of this API. As I said, this is an API built as an Azure function, and it was built using TypeScript. So it's a Node.js Azure function. So far, there was open authorization disabled. Let me enable it right now in the settings, and let's see that here we say that we are exposing our API using this application ID and this tenant ID, and the authority will be the one of our tenant, which identifies our tenant. With these three settings plus the switch on the open authorization, if I will run again my API from here, we will see that now the API is looking for an open authorization header in any request it will get and process. That's so true that if I'll go back to my HTTP test file as soon as the endpoints will be ready and listening, you see I have all of my endpoints listening. If I go back here and I start to get the list of candidates one more time, it's like as before, now I can't do that. I get a 401 unauthorized. Wondering why? Because now authentication and authorization are enabled, but I'm not providing yet an access token with the permission scope HR.consume to my target API. Okay? So how does it work under the cover? Well, in my function, let's focus on the get candidates, for example. We always say validate token. And this function, I will not dig into it now, but it is a function which will rely on a library. I'm just giving you a pointer or a reference, a library which is called JWT-validate, which has been implemented by one of our colleagues, Waldek Mastercards. And in this library, we have all of the business logic to do the validation of the token. So whenever we invoke any of the API endpoints, we always say, okay, try to validate the token. And if the token is good, all good. If not, 401, which is exactly what we have got in the HTTP request. Okay? So now, how can we manage this new set of settings in a Power Platform connector? Let me switch back to the Power Platform, and in Power Automate, I have a pre-registered, because it takes a while to configure all of the settings, a pre-registered connector, which is the HR Services connector. Let's edit this one. And let's see that in the security settings, well, actually here in the general settings, I have the URL that I'm providing through a dev tunnel so that I can access via a reverse proxy my API. And in the security section, I have Open Authorization 2.0, as Rabia was using before with Graph, Azure Active Directory, as before. And here I have the unique client ID of my consumer application, 722F. If we go here, this is precisely the client ID of the consumer, as I was telling you before. So here I will have the client secret of the consumer, and then the resource URI, instead of being the one of Microsoft Graph, will be the one of our custom API. So here, API BB6A is actually the unique URI of the API that we configure in Entra ID. And the scope we want to have is hr.consume. So nothing really special. We simply moved from the Microsoft Graph to a custom API of our own. So now we have the REST API running and secured with Open Authorization. We have the consumer application and the service provider application. We can now use it in an agent for Copilot Studio, built with Copilot Studio, so that we can see the whole round trip of our information in a secure manner. So let me go to Copilot Studio. And here I have an agent, which is called HR Team Agent. In this agent that I created in Copilot Studio, as you can see, I configured a couple of interesting things. One topic and one action. In the actions, I configured an action to get all of the candidates. If we dig into it, we can see that it relies on the connector that I just showed you in the Power Platform list of connectors. It doesn't have any input, and I can use it to get the list of candidates. So, for example, using the test interface, I can say list all of the candidates from the external HR service. And we should be able to get back the list of candidates through our external API. As you can see in the activity map, we see that the get all candidates action has been triggered, and we have got back all of the candidates from the API. But we can also play with a topic, like, for example, this one, in which I defined that we have an adapted card to collect the information about a candidate that I want to create in my system. And I can then rely on the connector to add a new candidate based on the input provided by the user through the adapted card. So let's try this one, and let's try this one using the Teams UI. So let me go to the Teams chat, and let's say that I want to add a new candidate. By doing that, I should be able to get the adapted card to fill in the form and provide all of the data about the candidate. So John White, for example, John.White at Contoso, could be a senior developer. Let's say that John speaks English and Italian, why not? And the skills are computer programming and project management. Okay, let's submit this request. Now, in a matter of a few seconds again, we will get back a response from the agent. And what's now really cool is that we can ask to the agent to give us the list of candidates, and we can easily get back the new list of candidates, including the new item that we just created. Again, takes a few seconds, and we will get back the updated list of candidates through the API. And as you can see, the last one is John White, the one that we just created. And this is so true that we were able to do that in a secure way, that if I will go back here in Visual Studio Code, in the terminal window, I can show you that we've got a bunch of HTTP REST requests for our API. And if you look at this tracing, we can see that, for example, the add candidate was invoked with a token which was valid, and for myself, which was the user I was using. In order to be able to do that, whenever you use a connector the very first time, the Copilot Studio agent will ask you to sign in and provide your identity so that since then it will be able to create an access token and consume securely the backend API of your behalf, so on behalf of your users. Okay, so I think this was quite an effective and useful demo to understand the potential of having secure connectors in place when creating agents with Microsoft Copilot Studio. And if you want to dig more into these topics, you should go to this URL, Copilot Dev Camp, aka.ms/Copilot Dev Camp. Here, starting from today, you can find a whole new section about building agents with Copilot Studio, including information about how to create and securely consume custom connector from agents built with Copilot Studio. And in there, you will also find content about how to create agents as a developer wearing the developer hat. So you can choose if you want to create declarative agents, custom engine agents, or if you want to rely on the no-code, low-code world and use Copilot Studio and Copilot Studio Agent Builder or the SharePoint agents. So a lot of content that you can use to learn more about how to create your own custom agents in Microsoft 365 Copilot. And what else, Rabia?
Yes, so that is an open source repo. So you can also find completed sample, the one that Paolo showed you, the HR services there as well. And we have other open source initiatives that is called Copilot Prompt Library. And we welcome all of you to go ahead and check out this repository as well. You can come up with your own prompt ideas for Copilot, for instructions for agent, etc. For example, here we have create a meeting action item prompt. So if you're really good at prompting, if you really want to show off the agents that you're using in your environment, in your workplace, please go and just open an issue, or if you're into contribute, you can even open a pull request to create a new sample for it. And what we do is we give shout out on social media for folks who actually contribute. For example, this was our last week's system prompt of the week, which is basically an agent instruction. And we also give shout outs in our community calls, in the Microsoft 365 developer community calls as well. So really a good way to share what you're doing and also find out what other people are doing with agents, etc. So we encourage you to go to these this library as well. And that's all for today from us. Thank you so much. And I think, Anna, you have some things to say as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining this session. We've got some next steps to help you continue on with your hack journey. First, if you aren't registered for the hackathon yet, make sure to head over to aka.ms/powerfuldevs/register to do that, because you must be registered in order to be eligible for the hack. Also, the Power Platform Advocacy team has curated some learning resources for you to learn more about what's possible in the Power Platform and get inspiration for your hack projects. Head over to aka.ms/powerfuldevs/CSD to check those out.
And as you start working on your hack projects, you might have some questions that come up. We've got a discussion section in our GitHub repo that we're monitoring, where you can ask your questions at aka.ms/powerfuldevs/discussions. Or if you prefer to talk to someone, you can attend some of our live office hours on Discord. Just go to aka.ms/powerfuldevs/office hours to see when those are running. Now, your hack submissions are going to be due by February 28th at 11:59 Pacific. To submit your project, head on over to aka.ms/powerfuldevs/project submission and fill out the submission form. And don't forget to fill out the badge submission form as well if you want to receive a badge for your submission. And finally, don't forget to join our remaining live streams to learn more about how to be a powerful developer. And don't worry, if you miss any of these live streams or just want to catch up on our Powerful Devs conference sessions, you can watch them all on demand at aka.ms/powerfuldevs/on-demand.
Thank you all for joining, and thank you to our speakers. This session is a part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. We'll see you at the next one.